Hello class, welcome to Building Construction for the Fire Service. This is Chapter 1, and in this chapter we will discuss the importance of understanding building construction, using proper terminology and when communicating, engaging in pre-fire analysis, and studying fire reports. The objectives we're going to cover in this chapter are as follows. We will understand the importance of studying building construction as a firefighter and understand why using proper language is so important for understanding building construction techniques and for fire ground safety as it relates to fire on the ground versus different types of construction. We'll also discuss why evacuation protocols are critical, identify the role of pre-fire plans and pre-fire analysis in firefighting operations, and understand the importance of looking for building deficiencies and dangerous conditions while conducting pre-fire planning walkthroughs. We will also explain why it is so important to study reports of significant fires. We'll look at after-action reports published by NEOSH, and I'll explain what NEOSH is as we get into the chapter. We'll discuss firefighting fatality and near-miss reports that have occurred in the past. And then we will finally discuss the relationship between risk and benefit and its impact on firefighter safety overall. Well, why do we discuss building construction? First of all, your life depends on it. Firefighting is conducted in, under, on top of, and around buildings. And so it is essential you have a working knowledge of how buildings are designed, constructed, renovated, and altered, and then how they fall into disrepair. And then also consider the fact that about 100 firefighters a year die in the line of duty. And more often than not, it can be to either poor pre-planning in the sense of not understanding types of construction in their area, or not understanding the construction and repair or disrepair of the building they're fighting a fire in. So that is one reason why construction is so important. Now let's talk about communication. Of course, we don't talk about communication in several classes, but in this class, as in always, and in every type of incident, clear communication is a critical factor for all fire departments. You must know how to use and understand proper language and industry jargon, as well as how to communicate with different agencies. Avianca airliners crashed on Long Island, New York due to miscommunication, strictly miscommunication. Here's another example. In one building collapse, the pull your line out was misunderstood. Mayday is the universal distress signal. And Mayday is now becoming the code for evacuation within the firefighter community as well. So it no longer applies strictly to airline distress. Mayday is becoming a universal word for let's get out. Now let's talk about retreating. There's always a resistance to retreat because firefighters tend not to want to quit a fire, naturally. But training is what you always fall back on, and it can overcome the resistance to quitting a fire. And terminology for abandoning a fire, if it has to be done, must use proper language. So when you're using terms, building fire and structural fire, those are all key technical words that are important. Never use the words withdraw and good order. It's too ambiguous. People don't know what the heck that means. So proper construction terms convey the hazards, specific hazards of a situation. Now let us talk about pre-fire planning. This is a term you're going to hear about and already have in other courses and will continue to hear about. But it doesn't just mean knowing hydrant systems, sprinkler systems, alarm systems, water supply in your area, etc. It also means knowing the structures in your field of response so that you don't have any unexpected hazards. So pre-fire planning is a key element of fire professionals, and without it, you're simply reacting as a firefighter to a fire rather than being prepared for many potential hazards. For instance, if you know that there's a fertilizer storage facility in your area, well, that's not going to be the same as an entire neighborhood of single houses. obviously it carries a whole completely different set of risks, construction, etc. One article you need to look up is titled Surveys Aid in Preparation for Handling Large Fires, and it was the first article on pre-fire planning. Today, pre-fire planning is a key component of many departments, and computers collect information. Not only is there an infinite amount of data that's on the internet, but interactive fire plans are available and provide real-time data from a fire building, even from a building that's involved. There are communication systems now built into newer fire alarm systems that communicate, as long as there's power or backup power or battery power, that can transmit key data or can give you data that occurred just before power went out. So you have a more clear understanding of exactly what's happening. Then there's geographic information, GIS, not to be confused with GPS. Geographic Information System is what the acronym GIS stands for, and it is a useful tool for pre-planning. Its inclusion is data-enhanced maps that have information on building uses and types, street arrangements, and utility locations, so they're much more specific. And then you also have GPS, Global Positioning System devices, that incorporate specific location of fire hydrants or flammable liquid storage tanks. So you have the advantage of GPS and GIS. Along with pre-fire analysis, there should be strong effort made to accumulate necessary information on which sound judgments can be based at the time of an emergency. Consider separating this from the inspection function. And I mentioned this briefly before. Inspections are one thing, and they're critical. They're important. They're important for code enforcement, potential reduction, hazard reduction, etc. But like I mentioned earlier, if you have a specialized facility, like a fertilizer storage facility, for example, or not specifically here in California, but in the rest of the nation and the world, there are nuclear power plants. That's a whole different ball game too than the neighborhood that's 20 miles away from it. So knowing this information separate from strictly inspections is really key. So I wouldn't just consider separating it from inspection function, but definitely make them two different things and know them as two different things and incorporate what information needs to be overlapped at the time of an emergency. When conducting a pre-fire plan, introduce yourself via a letter, not an unannounced visit. Unannounced visits tend to catch people off guard and surprise. So make sure that you introduce yourself via a letter, and make sure to emphasize in that letter that it is in everyone's interest that a fire not happen. So your goal is to help facilitate prevention of that. Use a high-ranking firefighter to conduct pre-fire plan because it lends stature to the event. And know and understand that non-firefighters will not always understand the ranks within a fire department. So you may have to explain that a little bit. It's like a civilian not understanding ranks in a military. They don't understand that a major outranks a lieutenant in the Army necessarily. So that is within police and fire departments especially, people don't understand rank. So it may be important to introduce yourself and introduce your comrade who's with you as your superior or junior officer, however that situation turns out to be. All contact with a building owner or manager should be through the individual who has the lead responsibility for that particular risk. A pre-fire plan identifies and documents risks for all who are involved. So let's talk about fire codes. There are many buildings that are not totally compliant. Some designers and contractors take shortcuts, unfortunately, because that literally plays with people's lives. So you must have, though, a good basic knowledge of building and fire codes. And the owners of buildings are expected to have that same building of knowledge and fire codes. But unfortunately, either they don't or they've been given misinformation. And in some cases, when you're talking about expecting the unexpected, you've got to remember that as fire codes improve over the years, there are always buildings that are grandfathered in. In other words, they were built perhaps 150 years ago before sprinkler systems were around. If they've renovated, then they're required to be brought up to modern code. But if not, then the owner may or may not be obligated, depending on the type of facility, to upgrade to modern codes. So that's one thing to bear in mind. So another thing about expecting the unexpected, when you're doing pre-fire plans, when you're doing a walkthrough, keep an eye out for problems and look in unexpected places. For instance, just in general inspections, you'll often find people storing things like cardboard boxes in the same closet with their water heater. Well, there's extra space there, but that space is there for a reason. It's not there to store cardboard boxes. So, but then there are other unexpected hazards. Exposed wires over steel girders. You'll see very unusual things, but not if you are not knowing to look for them. So definitely look in unexpected places and keep an eye out for unexpected problems or potential problems. Then there are after action reports, and we'll go more into detail on those in other classes, but after action reports, or post incident reports they're also called, are extremely important, and there has been an increase in after action reports by NIOSH. There has been an increase in after action reports by NIOSH. After action, and also sometimes referred to as post incident reports. You'll hear them called that like in more common vernacular. But NIOSH stands for the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And these reports contain information about building construction and fire behavior. Take the time to read these reports. And there are websites dedicated to this. One of them you should periodically visit is www.firefighterclosecalls.com. Another is www.firefighternearmiss.com to learn information from other firefighters' experiences. Of course, go to the NIOSH website itself. They have endless amounts of publication that are post-incident reports or after-action reports that you need to read and glean knowledge and learning from. Now, there's an important book you need to read called Why We Do What We Do. It is a book that is full of not only fire service traditions, but it has loads of history, including tragedy and then triumph, and is filled with lessons from real-world firefighting history. It also discusses incidents of heroism and bravery. Traditions of heroism and bravery should always be honored, of course. And then changing a fireground philosophy into one of firefighter safety and survival is critical for everyone involved, which is what you should take away. And then also taking a significant risk to protect a savable life, a little, very controlled risk to protect savable property, and no risk for what is already lost. Those are the priorities. Always first. Life first. Save what can be saved. But always carrying the mantra, or bearing the mantra, that safety is the #1 priority. So to summarize, as we go forward in this class, a couple of things that I discussed briefly in this first chapter. Understanding building construction will ensure the safety of every firefighter on the scene. If you understand where the weaknesses in a building are, you'll make sure that you and your team steer clear of those areas. For firefighters, using proper building construction terminology is critical to clarify communication, enhance professionalism, and ensure safety. Pre-planning, which we talked about, and knowing your buildings, which we talked about, is an important fire department function that enables firefighters to minimize surprises on the fire ground by learning everything possible about potential problems ahead of time. Pre-fire analysis goes a step beyond the basic pre-planning. It involves studying the pre-fire plan information that has been gathered to identify specific construction issues, concerns, and interactions. Many, if not most, buildings are not totally compliant with all building and fire codes, so pre-planning fire surveys can reveal dangerous conditions before an emergency occurs. And then, as I discussed, study reports of past fires and learn the lessons. And never forget that firefighter safety is the #1 priority when considering the risks of any situation. Thank you for your time and attention in this first chapter as we kick off this class in building construction. Remember how important it is. There's not a lot of technicality to this very first chapter, but you might already have questions. If you have any specifics that you can't reference in your text or from other sources, or if you need to anyway, at any time, feel free to contact your instructor. Thank you for your time and attention, and we'll see you next class.